Hey guys, what's up? It's Finch here. Today we're going to be discussing the viability ranking shifts for the DLC2 OU metagame. This is actually the first viability ranking shifts of the DLC2 OU metagame. We got the thread up earlier this month, and now we finally got voted on the slate. So basically, here is what got better, here's what got worse in the metagame, and some explanations as to why. The first two Pokemon that got better, perhaps a little obvious, at least in my opinion, are going to be Urshifu and Cinderace. So Urshifu previously was ranked in the A+ ranking, which meant it was one of the best Pokemon, but not quite the single best Pokemon, and now it's in the S rank with Magearna as, kind of the two best Pokemon in the metagame. Not only is it arguably broken, but also it's able to fulfill a ton of roles offensively. It can be a revenge killer, sucker punch, it can be a breaker with pretty much every set. It can be a sleeper with bulk up. It can just be a nice pivot with U-turn. It has the ability to cover a ton of threats with the dual stab it has, plus coverage for fairy types, and so on and so forth. It hits super hard. It pairs nicely with future sight, so it can be a balanced type Pokemon, works in bulky offense and hyper offense as well. Could even function as like a fully fledged revenge glove as a choice craft set, I suppose, but that really isn't why we ranked it. Regardless of this, though, Urshifu is a great option in the metagame as it stands. Next up, there's Cinderace. Cinderace is a bit more of a pivot, but it can easily turn into a breaker if it has the right coverage for the matchup. All in all, it also pairs well with Future Sight, and it has the ability to hit hard due to having stab on every move. Even U-turns chip things down. For example, U-turn on Slowbro does a lot. Pyro Ball, of course, is a great stab move, but high jump kick or gunk shot or Zen headbutt or whatever it might be, really able to abuse the right Pokemon that encountering lets it really just flourish in its metagame. Overall, Cinderace was overwhelmed initially with things like Zygarde and Karen Blackness here. Not only Zygarde being able to beat it, but also this Pokemon just being there as alternative physical attackers. But now it's finally really having its chance to shine in this metagame, and it's going to be interesting to see how it does in the coming days and weeks and whatnot. Next up, we have Landorus T, Pokemon that previously started off in A rank. In fact, it was pretty underwhelming in the early days of the DLC2 OU metagame, in my personal opinion. However, despite this, it has seen a bit of a rise in usage, as you see from the usage statistics all the way up. And while it's true that those usage on a ladder is arguably inflated, Landorus T is still great at role compression. It's able to check a number of things and also provide some offensive roles. Personally, I believe Scarf is the best set and the most common one. However, Stealth Rock variants and Swords Dance variants do function well as too. And it being an A+ rank alongside Garchomp makes a lot of sense as both are very good, but they fulfill slightly different roles. Landorus T being a bit more common, but Garchomp being arguably a bit more offensively threatening right now, in my opinion. So, yeah. Moving down the list, we see Rillaboom and Tornadus T rising from A- to A. Both Pokemon are very different, but they can be great team supporters while being more offensively oriented Pokemon. Rillaboom being able to do that with Grassy Terrain, Tornadus T with the combination of Regenerator and Heavy Duty Boots with U-Turn. Both Pokemon actually have U-Turn. In fact, Rillaboom's able to be an absolute Stone Cold killer with Choice Banded, Woodhammer, and Grassy Glide and Grassy Terrain off Stab as well. Grassy Glide being a great anti-offensive option, but Tornadus T is able to do something more similar due to its speed. Tornadus T can function as a win condition with Nasty Plot, and Rillaboom with Swords Dance as well, although they're more secondary sets. But yeah, all in all, these Pokemon are great team supports, great offensive presences with a bit of a kind of a balanced approach to them as well, and they function on a number of different archetypes, but particularly on balanced teams right now. So yeah, it's good to see healthy Pokemon like these circulating throughout the metagame as it stands right now. It'll be interesting to see how that continues moving forward. As we move down, Corviknight is finally one of the more premier birds in the metagame, if you will. While initially was overwhelmed by things like Tornadus T, Zapdos, and Moltres, it's now rising a bit in popularity as it's doing well against ground types. It's not weak to Stone Edge, which goes such a long way, and it's more of a reliable defogger than something like Skarmory, especially because it has U-turn, so it goes a long way too. Able to really wall things like Kartana, Rillaboom, potentially even do well against Garchomp and Landorus T and Excadrill as well. So that goes such a long way for a Pokemon that's a defogger. Also, it's the bulk up sets, although those arguably haven't gained enough traction. I think those are like underrated though. So I definitely would advise trying out a bulk up Corviknight in this metagame. Pressure is such a potent ability, and being able to take advantage of it, maybe running a specially defensive bulk up set, also means that you've got the ability to muscle past things like Garchomp and Landorus T over time. But yeah, no, I think that's pretty solid. Either way, I'm glad to see Corviknight rising up to A+, A-. Sorry, I definitely think it belongs there. Next up, we have Hydreigon. Hydreigon is a good Pokemon, being able to check things like Spectra and Heatran, which are both very common and arguably potent Pokemon in the metagame. On top of that, it can either function more defensively with the defog set, or more offensively with either Nasty Plot sets or outright breaking sets with Life Orb. It has the coverage moves. Of course, it can't hit everything with things like Finny and Heatran being in the metagame. You kind of have to pick your spots. You want to hit Fairies? Do you want to hit Steels? Do you want to just nuke everything and run 4 attacks, I guess you could do that too. But yeah, no, it definitely seen better days offensively, but still it's viable on both ends of the spectrum, and it's good enough to be an A- rank, which does definitely reflect its uptick in usage due to Spectre being pretty prominent in the metagame right now. Speaking of strong special attackers, and I just want to say sorry, I just had to stop for drinks. It's been a really long day for me. I had work until 5, and then unfortunately I was out seeing something personal until like 8:30 or 9. And I got home and I was like, oh my god, I have one thing after the other, and I finally get this written up. So it's been like kind of a marathon day for me, but I'm happy to say that everything's doing pretty well, at least for the time being. And I'm going to be able to get videos up pretty much every day this week besides maybe Sunday or Monday of the next week. So definitely stay tuned. We're going to get to that Urshifu ladder rank soon. But yeah, anyway, segueing back into what we were talking about the viability rankings, Tapu Lele, just a strong special attacker. I haven't seen a ton of it personally, but it seems like people were pretty receptive of ranking it high. It's really hard to switch into, so I get it. And A- ultimately was where we settled on it. So yeah, I don't have a ton to say on it relative to other Pokemon, just haven't used it. Same goes for a Powdon, but I kind of get a Powdon. It's a ground type that functions more defensively, being able to, of course, counter things like Regieleki, but also gets rocks up, some have recovery, can either phase things out or inflict status with Toxic, and check a number of Pokemon as well, potentially Heat Transform, especially defensive, or even non-Swords Dance grounds, or even Swords Dance Extra if it's more physically defensive as well, so that goes such a long way for it, yeah. Next up, we have Suicune, which, while it has been inconsistent, of course, you could run into the wrong matchup against Toxapex or Trick or Toxapex or whatever it might be, and just be completely outright walled and useless. But in the right matchup, you could absolutely scale out of control and really sweep unprepared teams, so you got to be ready for that. And all in all, Suicune with pressure is just a complete menace to society. You really don't want to run into that if you don't have any countermeasures to it, and it could go such a long way towards just breaking through teams and outright sweeping. So yeah. Tangrowth is next up. Tangrowth is a great physical wall, doing well against aforementioned ground types, aka any ground type not named Nidoking. Garchomp's physical sets, it does well Lander's T, Excadrill, and then also grass types like Kartan and Rillaboom, and even some other miscellaneous physical attackers like Non-Choice Bend Metal and Urshifu Rapid. Really punish them, even if it's just scouting them and getting a little Rocky Helmet chip, it still goes such a long way. But also, offensively, it isn't completely passive, and it can do a great job in really controlling the momentum. So, yeah. Hawlucha's next. Hawlucha actually saw a bit of a revival recently. Really fell off the face of the earth in the early metagame, but now that some of the win conditions that were a bit too much were finally kind of banned from the metagame, quick banned and suspected and whatnot, it's finally time for Hawlucha to shine. It's been really solid on hyper offensive teams. Pairs well with the terrain inducers such as Tapu Koko, in particular on hyper offense, and Rillaboom on various different offenses, and function as a win condition and a revenge killer in a pinch. So that goes a long way for those offensive teams that are definitely kind of, I guess, limited to a specific number of Pokemon to fulfill roles, and filling both those roles is pretty vital for those teams. So yeah. Next up, we have Slowking Galar. Arguably would have been even higher, like A or A plus in my opinion, if we had Quiver Dance Pheromosa, but despite that, it's still one of the best answers to Magearna in the metagame. It also is just a great special lead defensive Pokemon that's able to check for things like Clefable, Tapu Fini, etc. But also the offensive presence it has, slow down poisons, coverage between Future Sight and Scald and Flamethrower and whatnot goes such a long way, and being able to soak up Toxic Spikes is huge, while of course Future Sight is a menace to society with the right Pokemon. So yeah, I think Slowking Galar is a great option for balanced and bulky offense right now. I definitely implore you guys to try it out. I think you can really open up different team formulas, if you will, and I'm really curious to see how it develops in the metagame. Amoonguss Pokemon I'm a bit lower on. I actually wanted it to be in the C ranks, but it got bumped up to B as well. It gets Spore, it soaks up Toxic Spikes, and it checks things like Rillaboom still, so that goes a long way with Foul Play. It could even do well against Kartana and the ground types that we discussed before, so yeah, I definitely see some viability for Amoonguss. I just think it's still pretty limited, and you kind of wish it could do a bit more offensively against things like Zapdos, Moltres, and Ferrothorn as well. So yeah, you gotta be careful there, but it definitely can fulfill a purpose. Speaking of things you gotta be careful with, Moltres Galar, ton of offensive potential, but if you run into a Tyranitar or a bulky Magearna, it's going to be pretty limited in what it can do due to the dual stab and not having the extra coverage moves. However, despite that, it's still pretty solid. It's able to check Spectra and deal off a ton of damage if it's not facing one of the wrong things. Yeah, it's a bit of a risk-reward kind of gambit, if you will, but there's definitely a high level of reward there. So if you bring it and you are able to run into the right scenario, then you're going to do well, especially if your Hurricanes land. So yeah, definitely try out Moltres Galar as it coasts into the B rank, which is pretty cool. Next up, we see a couple of water types moving from C to C+. Quagsire, which is an unaware option of stall teams. albeit stall teams aren't very good right now, so it's unfortunate that we can't see it any higher, but still Quagsire is a viable option in Rotomosh, which is just slightly better than before as a pivot, able to check ground types and maintain momentum. Can do some various other things as well, like Pain Split or Will-O-Wisp for defog as well, so it's definitely not something that's more passive, but rather something that's more proactive. And while it's kind of limited in what it can outright counter, it definitely has a couple things that it fares well against. Sandex Drill, Landorus T, just to name a couple of them. Yeah, 1v1s, a number of other things as well, like Heatran and potentially Garchomp. So that goes a long way for it. Next up, we see Thunderous Therian, which is great on rain teams as a bit more of an offensive special breaker. It's electric immune. Weather Ball is able to really make up for the lack of pin power ice. If you get rain up, Thunder as well. Focus Blast demolishes things like Ferrothorn and plus 2 kill Blissey, which is cool. And yeah, all in all, Thunderous T is very strong and it flourishes under rain. Same for Seismitoad. It does pretty well under rain. It can be electric immune as well. And a Rain Sweeper, it abuses Swift Swim and its Water Stab and whatnot, but still, regardless of that, it's also a viable Stealth Rocker. I don't see it as really thriving in the metagame, but it's definitely a viable option in the C ranks. Same goes for, once more, another weather type in Volcanion. Volcanion hits like an absolute truck, be it on rain or unbalanced teams. Steam, Eruption, coupled with, Fire Stab and whatnot. It got covered Earth Power, for example, for Toxapex. It goes a long way. You can run boots or specs, but yeah, it's going to hit pretty hard all in all. And of course, 10 X-Cloud, which you can sum up in 2 words. Specs, Boom Burst. Actually, is Boom Burst 2 words? No, Boom Burst as a move is 1 word. We're calling it that. I'm not going to look like an idiot here. Yup. Now we are talking. Alrighty, well, next up we have some drops that unfortunately saw a bit less viability than previous editions of the metagame. Clefable is one that was controversial. I actually voted for it to be S. I actually feel like with it or Shifu in the tier, it should stay there. That's my personal opinion. I think Clefable is right now the Pokemon that you're going to be using the most in the metagame, more often than not, and it's just hard not to use. But there is a very valid counter argument that I do want to state. Just 1 second here. So the idea is that while Clefable is needed for a Shifu, this also means that it's limited to running more defensively oriented stats that are A, pretty predictable, and B, pretty easy to abuse with the right offensive and synergistic schemes on your builds, therefore making it so that while Clefable is a good Pokemon, Clefable can potentially deal with things like Urshifu or more passive options like Toxapex. It is also true that while it's your statuses, whether your Shifu check, etc., it's super limited, and you can take advantage of it. You can go to Pokemon that are strong in their own right and really don't mind Clefable at all. Worst case scenario, take a knockoff or a weak Moonblast that's likely resisted, and then they could either fire off a lot of damage or set up the field or whatever it might be, and that gives you a lot of advantages in games, and you could really build your team around kind of abusing Clefable with the right partners, so that's pretty cool. And arguably why you see it drop from S to A+ right now. I think it can definitely be argued for S or even S-, but we were kind of on the fence. So yeah, regardless of that, speaking of Pokemon that are in A+ discussion, Slowbro should drop from A+ to A. Future Sight set is still solid, don't get me wrong, but it's faced stiff competition among other bulky waters, other Future Sighters, other pivots with the generators such as Slowking Galar, Toxapex, and potentially even others as well. So yeah. All in all, Slowbro is still great, but it might just not be as great as before, as there are other Pokemon that are fulfilling usage, and in my opinion, that's pretty good. That's a healthy part of the metagame, yeah. Blissey dropped from A to A- just because, again, there's an abundance of physical attackers to stop the metagame. Or Shifu, for example, Halucha is seeing more usage. Rillaboom, Garchomp, Landorus T, X-Drill, all great options right now. And the special Pokemon, you see Taunt plus Magma Storm Heatran a lot, you see Subspectra a lot, and they just, Blissey doesn't really outright handle them as easy as it once did. Things like Dragapult, which Blissey kind of sat on, especially was in the substitute variant, for example, dropping in viability here. It doesn't really get outclassed by Spectra at all, by the way. They fulfill totally different roles. Dragapult's more of a hit and run kind of pivot with status and the ability to take advantage of status later on again with Hex, but all in all, these type of roles just don't work in this more aggressively paced metagame. Dragapult much appreciates more balanced, kind of slow-paced games where it could eventually methodically wear away at you with the prospect of Hex and status like it did in the DLC 1 metagame, and unfortunately this metagame state is less friendly and less directly applicable for that strategy, if you will. So therefore, Dragapult actually saw its lowest point in, as far as I can tell, ever, and now it's A-. I still think it should be close to A in my opinion, but yeah, no, A- for now, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes moving forward. Anyway, next off we have Kartana. As for Kartana, it's not really amazing right now. The thing is that we're still seeing some Buzzwole, and also the combination of things like Zapdos, Moltres, and also more Corviknight than ever before and the DLC 2 metagame, Mana Buzz, all running foul play nowadays, Tangrowth seeing usage, it's just a lot of things. Check it. Giga Impact set, in my opinion, is still pretty good and underrated, but that alone is basically just forcing trades, and while that can be cool, that's still not enough to really justify being A rank, especially when that's not the most common set, and other sets have their holes, especially when you can't kill things like Zapdos and Moltres at +2. So yeah, you got to be careful, but all in all, Kartana is still a very viable option. It's just it's limited in what it can do. Same goes for Buzzwole. While it does check a ton of things like, Rillaboom, Kartana, Urshifu, Excadrill, non-mixed Garchomp, Landorus T, it also is treated super passive against things like Clefable, Toxapex, Zapdos, Moltres, Tapu Fini, etc. That passivity, unfortunately, opens up those Pokemon coming in repeatedly and really controlling the field, getting away any progress you might have made, healing up themselves, and that is a huge momentum sub for teams, and therefore Buzzwole is really limited to more passive or stall-your builds that don't really have much cumulative momentum being added, as, a lot of that cumulative momentum is just completely hard stopped by Buzzwole, which is unfortunate for a Pokemon with such offensive potential. It is so passive, but it is that way in this metagame right now. It's just, unfortunately, sometimes the shoe just doesn't fit. Same goes for Latios in this metagame. It's actually stuck in a really awkward spot. A lot of times able to get off a trick and cripple something, and maybe, a resisted Draco Meteor, or if you get the right super effective stabbing, you do 40 or 50% to the right special wall, but that alone just isn't enough. You need to do more than you get a trick and really like a little bit of chip on something. There's so many like partial checks and counters to Latios in the metagame right now. Doesn't have the ability to hit everything. Draco Meteor is never going to be spammable again with so many fire types. And while Mystical Fire was a cute addition, it just wasn't enough to save it from, unfortunately, falling out of really mainstream OU usage for the time being. I do think Latios will pick back up in usage as time goes on due to the lack of pursuit in this current metagame. I do think that is the saving grace for Latios this generation. And it already is better than it was, say, last generation in OU. That's without a doubt in my mind. But it's not quite in the A ranks right now. It's going to drop just slightly to B+. So, yeah, not the end of the world, though. Next up, we have Blaziken. A Pokemon just hasn't been able to catch on yet. In fact, it just recently got banned from the underused tier, but that alone is just not enough for us to see it used in OU. It dropped from B+ to B rank. I'm kind of perplexed. I feel like it's better than this, but we haven't really seen the best applications. We haven't seen many, really well thought out structures with it, and I'm curious to see how it'll develop with the metagame. I do think there'll be a day when Blaziken's at least in the A ranks, maybe not banned, but somewhere in the A or A- categories. But until that day comes, until we see more usage of Insurgents of Blaziken, it just hasn't been doing the trick. It maybe can get a kill here and there, it can maybe trade here and there, but it's so fragile, it's so limited, it's vulnerable to a number of things, and Protect isn't really able to fit. You want coverage moves, but then, you're not really bulky enough to find many free turns. It's awkward, it's limited, and that, unfortunately, is not going to help the cause for Blaziken. I'm speaking of Pokemon that are slightly falling off. Magnezone is just a limited number of things it can trap. While it's true that Corviknight seeing an uptick in usage, we don't see much Skarmory. Ferrothorn can be trapped by the sub-body press Iron Defense set, but that set alone right now just isn't as good as it was previously. In addition to that, the teams are much more limited with a larger amount of offensive Pokemon to deal with in this metagame, so fitting Magnezone onto your team, especially more balanced and bulky teams, is less and less likely as time elapses, and therefore we saw a bit of a drop in viability. We could see it surge up in usage, especially if we see more Skarmory and more Corviknight, but who knows what will happen. We'll have to wait and see. Next up, we see Urshifu Rapid, not Urshifu Single, falling from B to B- with all the other Rain Pokemon. We actually did vote on all the Pokemon Rain, Pelipper, Kingdra, Barraskewda, etc. And ultimately, they all just elected to stay in B-, and Urshifu fell down to B- with them. While it does see some sporadic usage on balance teams, it's largely a Rain threat. It's not even a staple or a complete staple on a Rain team, so it's interesting to see how that'll fare out. But either way, Urshifu Rapid simply isn't super prevalent right now. We see a ton of Toxapex, Tangrowth's picking up, Slowbro's all over the place. Yeah, it's really just limited to clicking U-turn, unless it's paired with future sets. So you gotta be careful there for sure. Next up, we see Incineroar, and it's just like the prospect of Spectre checking alone. Like, that's really all it's there for. And being a pivot, that's not enough to really make people want to use it a ton. Unfortunately, they needed more, and it just didn't provide more. So yeah, Incineroar fell back off, unfortunately, in last, but certainly not least, Zapdos Galar went from B- to C+. It just hasn't really ever gained a ton of traction in this metagame. It's cool at using things like the Fog, especially when used on a stick-up offense team, because it gets that Defiant boost, but unfortunately, while it does have 100 base speed and nice dual stabs, it's fragile. Things can still check it. Regenerate a Pokemon can scout for it like Toxapex. Even if they do get too good after rocks, you can then switch to a resist, and it's locked there. It doesn't have any recovery, and you just wish it had a bit more it could do, and unfortunately that's not the case. So between being more fragile and not having the recovery, it's super limited, and the choice band is just not enough to really warrant a higher ranking than being in C+ for the time being. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this little insight on the Pokemon that got a little better, a little worse, the shifts in viability in the SSU metagame. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of these and more, so please be sure to comment them down below. In addition, if you enjoyed the video, smack that like button. You know it means the world to me, so that'd be really great. And finally, guys, if you want to see more, subscribe, because I'm going to get daily content up, or at least 5 to 6 times a week. So yeah, and let's get in touch, guys. If you guys want to be in touch even more, hit up the Twitter. Feel free to follow my Twitter. I'll link down in the description, and join the Discord server. We got a ton of people popping. It's really great, and I'm really appreciative of the community we're building. So yeah, gonna be a bit of a channel update later in the week. I'm not gonna be super active from the 3rd to the 10th of January. Probably more on that later, but don't worry, I'm still gonna be working on a ton of projects. I'm trying to get videos up maybe every other, every third day. We'll have to wait and see. But after that, gonna return to normal activity, and I'm just super hyped about 2021 in the channel and Pokemon and whatnot. So yeah, hit that like button if you guys are excited as well, and have a great day, guys. All right, bye bye. See you later.